welcome to MT Mindfulness Podcast. My name is Bob Chiang, and today I have Paul Sharpe, a Buddhist psychologist who has done some research in mindfulness meditation and attention. So, welcome, Paul.
Good to be here.
So, how did your journey in mindfulness started, Paul?
How did it start?
Yeah.
So I think weirdly I've had an interest in Buddhism, I think, for longer than I realised, in that I seem to have like a memory of like reading bits of Wikipedia and like kind of thinking, oh, this looks interesting, but I really don't understand what it's about. And then I think maybe about 2011, suddenly it all started making sense. I was probably trying to make sense of like a bit of unhappiness and like the dukkha aspect of Buddhism suddenly just, kind of resonated. And
so just for those listeners who does not understand what dukkha means, what is dukkha?
Suffering, like in any dimension, I would say. And so, and then suddenly the whole thing flipped around, and I was just like sort of voracious reader. And I was doing a psychology degree, undergraduate degree at the time with the Open University, and that was sort of propelled me sort of forwards in terms of like the psychological aspects of Buddhism, and consequently, I think I ran into mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which is a therapeutic application of mindfulness. So it's like a kind of a bolt-on to cognitive behavioral therapy, or cognitive therapy rather. And that was sort of how the Blue Touch paper was kind of lit, really. And then it sort of ran in parallel to the psychology sort of study that I was doing, and it just kept going, really. So
was there a particular book, or, I mean, that sounds like an insightful moment, or was it an experience that kind of spurred it on?
So in the beginning, I don't think there was there wasn't a particular book in the beginning, but there were a lot after that. And once I did actually get interested, because you were kind of asking about sort of spirituality more broadly, weren't you?
Yeah.
As well. So I kind of got interested in all kind of different aspects of, kind of spirituality. I felt like I was kind of like on a bit of a spiritual roller coaster for a while. And so I got interested in non-duality for a bit. And that was probably the gateway into Buddhism, I would say, in that, sort of somebody that I met mentioned, Shinzen, actually. He mentioned, I got into, kind of actually understanding what meditation was, and I also read Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha, Daniel Ingram, sort of pretty early on, because it was, accessible and like, kind of free. And so that was kind of what I was reading at the time. And then, this person mentioned like do nothing practice that was the first basic mindfulness, as it was at the time, practice.
Yeah. So was your interest, I know you had an interest in jhanas, so was your interest in jhanas there at the time, or was that developed later on?
I think that came a bit later. I'm not sure I have a timeline on that one. Oh, so that was probably, hearing about them was probably Daniel Ingram. I would have thought. And then I think in parallel I was maybe reading some books that kind of explained kind of what the jhanas are. And so I was reading, at some point I found Mindfulness in Plain English. That was pretty early on, which I thought was really good. There's a bunch of sort of other books at the time. But yeah, the jhanas kind of like, they just sort of, I don't know, I think they grab people, don't they? It's like, oh, what is this? What are these things? And I do remember actually, anyone that I sort of would run into who would talk about like meditation, I was like, just wanted to kind of ask them questions really. And I remember talking to someone and said, oh, like, the jhanas, right? So can you teach me what these things are? And it kind of seemed quite a little bit kind of offish, and they actually they said, oh, you probably want to speak to she actually said Christopher Titmuss, who's sort of down Totnes, sort of down sort of near where I was living. And so anyway, there seemed to be a little bit of a kind of like a mystique around them, and obviously like subsequent to that I kind of read everything I possibly could about them, and so still a fascination.
So did you go and see Christopher Titmuss?
No, I didn't.
No.
I didn't because I think like in relation to the jhanas, and there was some parallel stuff going on in that I decided. So the first tradition I got interested in was the Mahasi tradition, again probably because of Daniel Ingram, and so I was kind of reading about kind of noting and those kind of techniques.
And did it make sense to you at the time?
It did make sense. Yeah, it did make sense. And, obviously, the noting, approach, it sort of coincided with discovering, basic mindfulness.
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, well, I was really interested in, but because I have sort of a background in programming, like kind of software, it's very, it's quite sort of a methodical, like a bit of a methodical approach to learning things. And I thought, okay, well, how do I learn this? How do I learn meditation then? And there seemed to be these, systematic approaches. This is why, unified mindfulness was, it had my name all over it, because it was, not only was it like systematic, it was because I was interested in the research, the research that was going on, into mindfulness and meditation in parallel. I could sort of, obviously, Shinzen sort of partially designed it as a systematic way to, to kind of study, meditation and mindfulness. And so this was, floating my boat, all kinds of boats that was floating. So, and I have to say, I was thinking before we were going to meet, I was remembering that the thing that really, blew my mind at the time was that he was accessible, so it was the phone retreats.
Yeah.
And I was like, everything seemed to be coming at once. It's like suddenly everything started to make sense. I listened to, I discovered The Science of Enlightenment, the audio book, which was sort of my, just kind of like introduction to Buddhism really. And listened to that and I thought, this is easy to understand and it makes sense. And so all these things were coming at once. And there was I got, obviously, I learned the concept of retreat and practice and that kind of thing. And so, the first retreats that I did were the online sort of monthly retreats, and I actually couldn't believe that. Direct access.
You've got the man himself.
Yeah, you could ask this person a question, like he would give you an answer. It's like,
yes,
what's that about?
Yeah,
It's amazing.
Yeah. It is amazing. The source itself. And it's funny. You and me, Paul, because we had communicated, because Paul's based in the UK, and we had communicated. I can't remember, was it a year or two, and then you decided to go on retreat in LA at the same time I did. So we had known each other just by correspondence, but we actually met at the retreat. But it was funny because the day we met, we had to go into retreat. We had to stay silent. So that was funny. But we did cheat a bit in terms of we wrote each other notes during the retreat.
That's allowed.
Yes.
It was funny because I think once I kind of discovered it, the next thing was like, well, surely someone in the UK is interested in this. And I can't remember how your name came up, but I think that was how we started kind of chatting. And then the retreat came up in 2017, and we kind of I kind of thought, oh wait, we've never actually met face to face, and then like silence had already begun when we kind of rocked up.
Yeah.
So it was the end when we actually got to chat.
And what were your highlights from the retreat? Can you remember?
From that retreat?
Yeah.
Highlights. Well, like a full interview with Shinzen was definitely a highlight.
Yeah. What about doing the morning call? You had to ring the bell. Did you do that?
I did do that. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, so I had. So it wasn't my first retreat, and so I kind of knew. I sort of, I had my own sort of concept of how to make use of the time. I mean, it was all so good in that, there was effectively sort of, there was instruction, wasn't there? Like every morning, and then Dharma talk in the evening, practice during the day. I mean, kind of a sort of a traditional structure, but with all of the extras, like the phone calls in the room. I don't really remember that.
I can't remember now.
Yeah, you got some personal.
Oh yes, you had the interviews with Shinzen. Yeah.
That was great, and like a clever sort of use of contacting everyone, staying in contact with everyone. The all night sit was was definitely an experience. It was
with this coffee, really strong coffee drink.
Yeah, and it was kind of like that retreat for me was like a smorgasbord, really. There were so many different kind of high points. I definitely built up some mindfulness. I think I got pretty early on. So Gaia House is sort of my local retreat centre in Devon, and I sort of dipped my toe in by going on some like day retreats, and then I think I did like a weekend retreat there. And I think pretty early on, without really understanding what was happening, just by sort of trying to follow the instructions that the teachers were giving, I did actually sort of experience what mindfulness is. It was only with hindsight that I really know that was the case now. Yeah. But I remember it was, I was sort of quite naive, really. But I remember I wasn't even sort of doing formal meditation. I remember just being out of the meditation hall at some point and just kind of walking around the grounds there and like looking at a dandelion or something and thinking, wow, that's bright. And I was like, is that like, why is that so bright? And I thought, I'm not imagining this, am I? And I was pretty sure I wasn't, but it was actually quite a lot later when, you know, I'd sort of had that experience multiple times. And I thought, this is definitely a thing. And I know now it was a consequence of, you know, the mind sort of quietening down. But yeah, it's a funny, it's a kind of funny path in some ways, in that it wasn't until maybe a few years later that I actually heard, it was probably Ajahn Brahm actually, that I really, you know, thought some of the stories that he told, I thought, yes, that was exactly my experience after sort of doing multiple retreats, and, you know, like the intensity of the taste of food on retreat, as a consequence of the meditation, that kind of thing. And so it was very reassuring in terms of having like a reproducible experience, if you know what I mean. And that I mean, I always get something like that on retreat, so it sort of gives me faith in the practice in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, for me, you know, the retreat where we were both at, you know, it was a great retreat. But there was the bonus bit, if you remember, that we were invited by Shenzhen to the Sweat Lodge experience. What was that like for you?
I was really sort of grateful that we were allowed to go. Didn't really know what to expect. I think that was my first experience of a ceremony, actually. I know, so we had a little bit of reading material, didn't we?
Yes.
In advance.
Yeah.
And it was bang on, like in terms of like the experience, in that I think it kind of said that you know, you'll sort of notice when the ceremony has kind of picked you up. Especially, I think the first one, when there's a little bit of kind of anxiety of the unknown or whatever.
I mean, it was my first sweat experience, and I had thought it was just something like a relaxing sauna. I didn't realize we would be in a cramped space, huddled together, asphyxiated, hot.
Hot. Yeah, definitely hot. You know. Yeah, so my memory is we were next to each other, right?
I can't remember.
Can't remember. No. Yeah, I do remember kind of, you know, because we were sort of the newbies. We were sort of at the back, and I remember like their bit, but it's kind of like crouched down, and there was like a stick in my back for like 2 hours, and yet, you know, when we came out, like I get sort of I get sort of lower back pain. You know, that was cured. Like, it was literally cured. Even, you know, being in a really uncomfortable kind of position. I mean, that was such a bonus, wasn't it, at the end?
It was. I mean, after the retreat, and then from that retreat, going through the sweats ceremony, it just felt like my whole being was just purified.
Absolutely. And it didn't end. It was so, I know, I suppose there's a little bit of priming involved, in that they said that it's kind of like a 4-day experience, really, and that the ceremony won't have quite ended for another day. And I had the weirdest dreams, like that, you know, the day after. And I mean, obviously we'd had 10 days of retreat and then the sweat lodge. But it was definitely an experience. So good, really good experience.
And then you came back to the UK and you decided to do research in mindfulness, did you? Or were you doing research at the time?
I think I'd already started there. I think I might have been a year in by that point. Yeah, I think I was, because it was summer, wasn't it? I think it was summer.
Yes, yeah.
LA. Yeah. Yeah, so I think I was a year in, and so I'd done a few experiments. So my PhD was looking at the effects of mindfulness meditation on tension regulation. So I guess attentional control is another way of putting that, whether it has a positive effect on people's ability to keep their attention under control.
And you had to get some students in order to keep up the practice, did you?
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I had to have, in terms of there were a few experiments that involved trying to teach people to meditate when I felt I was only just learning myself.
Yeah.
So that was a bit of it's kind of like a rapid, what's the word? A kind of a crash course in trying to teach something that I really realize now that I didn't fully understand at the time. And so, I had to sort of find groups of people who were interested in learning and come up with a method of teaching them a technique that, would potentially have an effect on their attention. And so quite a lot of the early bit of the PhD was just kind of researching, well, what technique am I gonna teach people? And I had it was a bit of a funny process, what I ended up doing in that. So the first retreat that I did at Guy House, the first long retreat, I did a 9-day retreat. It was a bit like the Sweat Lodge in that I had no idea what I was in for, really. I did loads because I was sort of in book mode. I did loads and loads of reading and, kind of preparation. And I remember sending, like a final email to the teacher saying, "Oh, is there anything else I need to do to prepare? What should I do? Is there anything else I should have read?" And like the response came back, said, like, "Don't have any expectations." Oh, I see. Yeah. But it was actually it was after that retreat that I got friendly with someone who we got talking about the jhanas, and he said, "Well, so what do you think of Ajahn Brahm then?" I was like, "Who?" He said, "Oh, you have to read this book." And so he recommended Mindfulness, Bliss and Beyond. And at that point, like I was kind of, I was on a slightly different road at that point. And so I found out who Ajahn Brahm was, and I realized like there were so many of his guided meditations that it solved a problem for me, in that I think because I had a little bit of uncertainty over being able to guide and to teach meditation, I suddenly thought, well, why don't I just not do it? Why don't I just use recordings of an expert?
Yeah.
And it could have, I guess it could have been sort of somebody else, but because he had so many guided meditations and they seemed very, very authentic. He seemed like a really good teacher. So basically I did huge amounts of kind of watching and listening Ajahn Brahm's guided meditations, finding out like what he was teaching. He was actually, because he's in Perth, Western Australia, but he happened to be coming over to the UK because he was supporting the Anukampa Bhikkhuni project, which is a project for fully ordained bhikkhunis, so Buddhist nuns in the UK, first ever. And so he was kind of over supporting. I was like, it was a little bit, I hadn't thought about this, but it was a bit like the online retreats with Shinzen. It's like these things seem to be like coming to me, and I was like,
synchronicity.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought, well, yeah, I'm going to actually sit with him then. And so, that basically kind of solved my problem, really. And I just got permission to use some of his guided meditations as the teaching material, basically. And I thought of myself as just kind of like curating, really, rather than, doing a poor job of being a teacher.
Yeah. And what is it about Ajahn Brahm's teachings and style that you're attracted to, or you think in terms of the benefits, and what is it that attracts you to it?
So the first thing actually was the jokes. So he tells jokes,
right.
And I was like, in the beginning, it did. Even with me, it kind of jarred a little bit in the beginning. And I remember there was a student who didn't like the some of the. I think I maybe in the first courses I gave a little bit of. I picked out some teachings, and there might have been some jokes in there, or just his personality sort of came through, and some people didn't like it. But
yeah,
I thought this seems kind of like authentic, and I then started thinking, like, why is he doing this? He's got to be doing it for a reason. And the theory that I came up with was that I thought that I'd sort of noticed that it basically puts you at ease, and so it initiates the relaxation that you want, like body relaxation at the start of a meditation. The more I learned, because I basically slammed what he was doing and, completely deconstructed it. And I thought, oh yeah, these are like skillful means. And then, I've kind of read all of his books. And
can you just, for those listening who doesn't understand what skillful means, could you just kind of explain that?
For me, they're just, how would I describe them to someone? I think they're a bit like hacks, they're like clever techniques for doing something which is useful. Yeah. Say, just say for instance, relaxing the body. So his Ajahn Brahm's, he has what he calls the basic method of meditation, which is like a freely available kind of booklet that you can download. And it's basically the first sort of stages of anapanasati, like just translated. So mindfulness of breathing translated into, I guess, like Western language in a format that anyone can understand. And so, so he has all these kind of like techniques for, obviously the first thing you need to do is kind of sit down and shut up and, and relax the body. And so he's got all these ways, like at one point he started, he's constantly refining this stuff. I actually watched some of it, evolve, but he started using this phrase, relax to the max. And it sounds kind of like ridiculous, but like at the same time, you're kind of thinking, oh, you're either following the instruction or you're thinking, oh, that's funny.
I like that. Relax to the max.
And it's like, oh yeah, like just kind of chill out. And then obviously there's the instruction as well, and he's So I would say, that's a skill for me. And he's got, like a library of them that he's constantly using. Yeah.
And it kind of blows the perception that meditation, mindfulness has to be austere, no jokes. It kind of blows that apart, doesn't it? People's image of what mindfulness and meditation should be.
Yeah, because I think it should be it should be the opposite, but it's done, you know, the experts in this stuff, it's done from like a deep knowledge of what what the goals are. So in sort of Ajahn Brahm's approach, you know, it's all about letting go, and the first thing you want to do is let go of the body. And so you for that to happen, you've got to be comfortable. And so you just need to learn, you know, you need to learn that it's okay to be comfortable, and that it's okay to, like not to be uptight at this, you know, it's not obviously, okay, like it's a bit unusual maybe that it's all silent. But any technique which kind of is useful and feeds into like what the process is all about, you know, what the techniques and the process is all about in which is principally letting go and stillness in Ajahn Brahm's way of teaching, I think. Whatever works, right?
Yeah. So, if you could synthesize for you, what would be the key components in, you know, Ajahn Brahm's, in terms of what he's teaching for you?
I'm not sure that I think about it in terms of key components. I mean, he teaches, you know, it's from, you know, it's just authentic Buddhism, you know, it's straight down the line, you know, as close to, you know, as close as possible to what the Buddha was teaching. I think it's just, the aim is just to be, you know, like scrupulously accurate to what the authentic teachings are. And so there are strands of sort of the Buddhist Society of Western Australia, which are very sort of focused on the suttas and like sutta study, and you know, almost kind of letting sort of non-monastic people into the monastic way of life. It's very sort of inclusive if you're kind of interested in that side of things, but also accessible if you're not, if you're just kind of wanting to just kind of meditate once a week or whatever. There's always a Friday night meditation, and so it's very authentic, and anything that you see being taught, you can be sure that it's accurate, I think.
Yeah. And in terms of, so I suppose what I'm trying to ask is, does Ajahn Brahm give reasons of why one should meditate?
Yeah, all over the place. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, yeah, you know, to anyone who has not read Mindfulness, Bliss and Beyond, I mean, it's called A Meditator's Manual, I think is like the subtitle.
Yeah.
For me, like it was like the main, you know, kind of reference, but I almost always take it on retreat if there's anything that, you know, like if I think there's like stumbling blocks that are going on, then I have it as I do have it as like a reference manual. Sorry, what was the question?
So let me rephrase. Let's go to the book. What are for you? What are some of the key things from the book?
You said So I mean, so the reason that I mentioned that book is because he talks about the whole path to enlightenment. You know, his same as like the Buddha. It's like he's just basically teaching the path.
Yeah,
he's teaching the path, and if there's a goal, then I guess it's liberation. So it's liberation and everything all of the stages along the way, basically. So it's keeps the, like the ultimate goal in mind all the way through. But there are sub goals within both his teaching and the book.
And what are some of the sub goals?
So the ones that are very prominent for me at the moment are the hindrances.
Okay.
I kind of learned about them along the way, and various people were saying, "Oh yeah, they're really important." And for a long time, I thought, "Oh, okay," but like, I'm kind of more interested in like watching my breath. And
sorry, before you continue, just for those who don't understand what hindrances are, could you kind of explain?
Yeah, so the so there are 5 of them. The ones that are the biggest hindrances are craving or wanting and aversion or ill will. Really, they're the ones that I think if you sort of get interested in them and sort of monitor your sort of daily experience, then you start to realize how big they are. Like, for me anyway, I mean, I kind of look at sort of my daily experience through the lens of the hindrances, really. So I'm constantly seeing wanting and not wanting.
Yeah.
In just sort of moment to moment experience. But the key thing that that's relevant that he explains about the hindrances, which was of interest to me, is that they're called hindrances because they hinder jhana states from arising. So when the hindrances are gone, the jhanas happen naturally. And so the reason that you should be interested in them, if you're interested in jhana, then you have to be interested in the hindrances, because if you don't know what they are, or you don't recognize them, then the jhanas won't happen, I don't think, is my understanding. Yeah. And so I think a lot of practice is sort of mindfulness of hindrances and knowing like what to do when they're present, what to do with them, which is often, not make them any worse than they already are.
So so for those listening, what kind of things do you do in terms of if you recognize a hindrance, and what kind of, is there a technique that you do, or is there something specific that you kind of work with them?
So I don't think I have. I don't remember actually the antidotes to them well enough. I mean to sort of have this as a reflex soon.
Okay.
So that, because the one thing that interests me is sort of a moment to moment experience of a hindrance, like a bit like in Unified Mindfulness gone.
Yeah.
I'm really sort of keen to test whether the antidotes to the hindrances work. So that, if you're sort of experiencing, anger or, sort of ill will towards an object or a person or whatever, if there's a technique that you can apply and the hindrance goes away, it's almost kind of like doing experiments with the hindrances and like knowing what definitely works to dial them down. Occasionally I kind of see things that work, sort of partly from reading, partly from sort of trial and error. One technique that I've been listening to some talks. So the the monks and nuns do this rains retreat in, I think it's July to October every year. And Ajahn Brahm gives talks, Dharma talks during those retreats. And they're some of the best Dharma talks I've ever heard. They seem to kind of answer a load of questions I've never heard answered anywhere else.
Yeah.
And one that I listened to recently, he was kind of talking about Anatta, so non-self. And I think if I remember what he was saying, like he was kind of talking in terms of a practice. So, you know, like kind of negative emotions or just kind of negative thoughts that sort of might come up. I think that a practice that he was suggesting was like, well, it's not me. This is not, you know, this is not my thought. Is how I understood, how I sort of applied what I thought he was saying.
Yeah.
And I remember him saying, I need to listen to the talk again, but I remember him saying that you get this feeling of lightness if you do this practice. So it's a bit like, obviously if you engage with something, it tends to stick around and often gets worse.
Yeah.
So conceptual proliferation, you know, whereas letting go of things, you get one thing that I think you can experience immediately is this kind of this lighter feeling, like you've put something down, you know. So if you've got this feeling, oh, you know, so-and-so did such and such, or like, that's really annoying. Like, if you have enough mindfulness so you can notice what's going on, just think, oh yeah, well, this is not my experience. This is like, there is no me to have this experience. Like, so whatever, let's just forget about it. Kind of thing. I know it seems silly, but it's a bit of, I'm kind of sort of interested in these kind of, you know, practical applications of I assume that like monks and nuns are doing this all the time, but I don't hear a lot of people sort of talking about these techniques, and they seem to have this immediate feedback. It's like, oh yeah, well, it's not mine. It's like there's just conditions that have happened, and it's like the sooner you just like ignore it, like the better you feel, I think. Hopefully.
And I know we've got about 8 minutes. Is there anything you want to touch upon in terms of your practice, or how you know mindfulness kind of has kind of connected other aspects in your life?
I don't think anything specific to, nothing's coming to mind for me. One thing that I have been thinking recently, which I guess it has a bit of a sort of a dual aspect to it. So partly from the research that I did, which was very much sort of focused on attention.
Yeah.
I had to look back at what my final thoughts were at the end of when I kind of wrote up my experiments and had to think about things. And I realized that now I still think what I thought a couple of years ago, which is that the way that I sort of read the literature when I started my research was that it seemed to be very much about attention, and people seemed to be very sort of interested in attention, partly because I think it has such a long history in psychology, and there's a lot of theory and sort of practical ways of measuring attention. But the theoretical aspects of mindfulness, they had two aspects to them. So there was an attention regulation aspect that seemed to be an important effect, possibly of mindfulness and mindfulness meditation. And then there was an emotion regulation aspect. And I thought, well, all of the action seems to be on attention. So like, let's look at that. by the end of things, I thought, oh, I wish I'd actually looked at emotion regulation, really, because partly because I think it's what, obviously there was a big, there was a sort of a boom in mindfulness, and it was in the media a lot, and people got interested in it, and apps, and blah blah blah. But what I imagine is that people were interested in it because they wanted to see a benefit from it, right? They wanted to feel happier, maybe, or calmer, or something. And I actually think that it's the other side. It's the emotion regulation and sort of well-being side of things that most people wanted as a goal. Obviously, I'm assuming, making a bit of an assumption, but and so I think that in terms of research, I think that's the lowest hanging fruit in terms of actually sort of helping people, helping people feel happier. And also, I think it's an easier approach, because I think you can get a lot of those benefits without actually doing formal practice. So like practice in life practice during the day, little micro hits, that kind of stuff. I think, and because I think a lot of people probably get excited and then do some practice and then don't really see any results, and stop, because they're not being given the things that keep the motivation going, where you see results quickly, really.
I must say that what you're saying, I can see that, because when I first started practicing in terms of mindfulness, I became much more aware of my emotions, whereas normally what happens is people have emotions, but they're not fully aware of the emotions they're experiencing. It's almost like they're on autopilot and driven by the emotions. But when you start to have greater clarity of your emotions, then you become more aware of, I'm being triggered in terms of I'm getting upset, or I'm becoming more angry, and just developing the skill of that awareness and how you can kind of regulate and being able to be more skillful with those emotions, I think definitely can make one to be more aware and be happier, rather than suppressing or pushing those emotions away.
Definitely, yeah. And I think it took me quite a long time to sort of come up with like a definition of insight in sort of psychological terms of what mindfulness is, and I sort of settled on sustained meta awareness, which for me just really means being aware of what's happening in your own mind. And so you can direct mindfulness, meta awareness, towards what your attention is doing, like what you're aware of. But yeah, you can also pay specific attention to like how you're feeling. I mean, it is really I think it's kind of that simple. When you develop like mindfulness, for me, mindfulness is on a scale, so it can be strong or weak. But once you know how to kind of increase it a little bit and like direct it towards things, that's when you really sort of you can really sort of start getting the benefits of it. Because like you say, you suddenly become aware. It's like, oh, like I've got this tension in my body. Like, it's because I'm really annoyed at something, or I'm really unhappy about something.
Yes.
And then beyond that, there are ways of reducing that. What I think is the next step is that you can't stop there. I don't think you have to think, well, yeah.
Yeah. When you were talking about where you kind of directing that attention or to yourself, the image I had was like a microscope where you can kind of increase the magnification so you can get deeper into what's happening. And so yeah, that was the image that popped up for me.
Yeah, it's like turning the microscope inwards, like working out how it works. So because you can, focus outwards on things and they become, more vivid.
Yeah.
But then, you can turn it inwards and look at, sort of your own experiences. And I think there's a lot of juice in doing that.
Yeah. And I think that's where the insight starts to happen, when you magnify the microscope.
Yeah, although getting back, I mean, it's a longer conversation, but the other thing about Ajahn Brahm's way of teaching is that calm and insight are part of the same path, and you can't have one without the other. And it's the jhanas that basically produce the biggest insights. So it's only, another thing in terms of sort of goals is my understanding is like, so the insights in the insight meditation sense are non-verbal, like mind-blowing realizations. And so they happen then, it's nothing to do with thinking. You have to like learn how to let the thoughts subside. And then it's this other way of knowing things. It's another type of knowledge that happens, and the jhanas are mental states that precipitate the arising of the insights, which is another reason for cultivating them, I think.
Yeah. And I think before we finish, I would just like to talk a bit about both your interest and my interest, which is in terms of gardening and nature. So how did you come about in terms of your interest in gardening?
I think, well, it seems weird because I was kind of brought up around my mum and dad sort of gardening. Were never interested, like when I was younger. And then weirdly, it's a little bit like the Buddhism thing, and it was like rumbling along in the background, and then suddenly it just like it gathered up enough momentum, and then suddenly I was addicted.
Yeah.
And now it's like when I think I can remember looking at people like, well, probably like my mum and dad, who would just spend all this time in the garden. It's like how do you not get bored? And now I'm like, I would look at people who were looking at me thinking that, I think, you don't know what you're missing. Like, how can you not be gardening under these conditions? It's like there's so much, feedback that you get. It's
Yeah, I mean, for me, it'll be interesting to hear what your experience is like. I think, but for me, I think it's my connection with nature, with the natural world. Feeling the soil, and then looking at attending to the plants, and just the amazing. I think you can think scientifically. You've got the seed, you've got the water, you've got the sunshine, but there's something magical about seeing the actual process of this tiny seed that just bursts into a plant and grows, produce food and stuff. There's something just magical about it that you can't just capture.
Yeah, and it never gets old. Like every year, I don't know. I never get. I remember. So that is another way that I got into it. So I just the first thing I ever grew when I had a garden was tomatoes, and I had got some seeds, and I was like, I couldn't believe, like put the seeds in and then they became plants. And I think I was hooked at that point. Put them outside and they all got blight and died. But that was okay. I carried on.
Yeah. And I think it's also the interrelationship between the different plants and the different wildlife it can attract in terms of pollinators, bees, butterflies, and there's just this vibrancy that's kind of produced from that.
Yeah, and I think as you get sort of more experience, that's kind of what I'm trying to do in my garden at the moment. Is like sort of go up, work my way up the sort of the chain.
The gardening jhana states.
Yeah, well, yeah, maybe. But so I'm always kind of I'm always excited when there's like a new bit of wildlife that's moved into the garden. I decided that I bought some ladybirds because I wanted them in my garden, and they stuck around for a while, and then
you actually bought ladybirds.
I did buy some ladybirds for my garden, and then I read that they tend to they'll stick around, but then you won't see them after 5 days, and everyone was right. But then this year, just through the garden sort of having just more plants and the right kind of plants, they came back. So unless they were hiding somewhere.
And the other thing that's coming up for me is, in terms of mindfulness practice, is in terms of improving ourselves and also our connection with other human beings and other living things around us. And I think for me, gardening does that in terms of my connection with the with the world and living things.
Definitely. Yeah. Ajahn Brahm has he has a very particular way of teaching loving kindness meditation.
Yeah.
But he starts with a very simple object, which for him is always a kitten. So he starts by directing it to an imaginary kitten. But he said that sometimes it's babies for people, but there was a woman who no animal worked for this lady, but she had a plant. She had like a house plant that she really looked after, and that was the thing that just generated those initial feelings that you can then make sort of bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
So it's if you have a bit of love for plants, you can definitely kind of work that into meditation without a doubt.
Yeah. Right. On that note of love, thank you very much, Paul.
That was fun.